The classroom was filled with sounds of piano keys being pressed. Some notes right, some wrong, but the room felt alive. It was a small music center in the middle of a quiet town, where people of all ages came to learn how to play the piano. Most of them were beginners, smiling, laughing, trying their best to follow the teacher's instructions. Among them sat a woman who didn't quite fit in. She wore plain clothes, no makeup, and kept her hair tied back in a loose bun. It looked quiet, like someone who didn't want to draw attention. While others chatted before class, she sat in the corner silently, looking at the piano in front of her like it was something far away. The teachers didn't pay much attention to her. To them, she was just another older woman trying to learn something new, but there was something different about her. She never asked questions, never made mistakes that beginners usually make, but also never played with full confidence. It was like she was holding something back. One of the instructors, growing a bit frustrated, placed a complex piece of music in front of her and said, "Try this next week. Let's see how far you can go." His tone wasn't rude, but it wasn't kind either. The others in the room looked at her, surprised. Even they could see it was too advanced for a beginner. But she didn't argue. She simply nodded and took the sheet with both hands gently. Some of the other students whispered to each other after class. "Why do they keep giving her the hard pieces?" One said. "She barely speaks. Maybe they think she's not trying." Another replied. But no one really knew what she was thinking. She packed up her bag quietly and walked out, alone. Outside, the weather was cloudy. The wind pushed gently against her long coat as she walked down the sidewalk. Her steps were slow, but steady, as if she had walked this road many times before. When she reached her small apartment, she unlocked the door and stepped inside. It was a simple place, neat and quiet, like her. But in the living room, pushed against the wall and covered with a white cloth, was an old piano. She stood in front of it for a moment, just looking. Then she slowly removed the cover, revealing keys that were a little dusty, but still beautiful. She sat down carefully on the bench and placed the music sheet in front of her. Her fingers hovered above the keys, trembling slightly. She pressed one note. It rang out, soft but clear. Then another. She played the first line of the music without looking at the paper. Her eyes were closed, like she was feeling each note instead of reading it, but after a few seconds, she stopped. Her hands dropped to her lap, and she looked down. Breathing deeply, there was a strange sadness in her eyes, like she was fighting something inside her. She reached out and touched the keys again, but didn't play. Instead, she gently closed the cover and stood up. She stared at the piano for a few more seconds before walking away, leaving the sheet music on top. She didn't say anything, but the piano had said enough. There was something hidden. There was something she wasn't ready to show. Back at the music class, no one had a clue who she really was. To them, she was just quiet, just average, maybe even a little strange. But the truth was, they were all wrong. Completely wrong. They had no idea what kind of hands they had just handed that music to, and she wasn't ready to tell them. Not yet. The days passed slowly. Every evening the same quiet woman returned home, placed her bag on the table and looked at the old piano. It was always the same. She would sit down, touch the keys gently, and then stop. She wanted to play. Her fingers remembered more than she admitted, but her heart still held back. Inside the music center, the instructors had already made up their minds about her. They thought she was slow, not serious enough. One teacher even told a colleague, "I don't think she lasts long. She never shows any interest." But what they didn't understand was that interest isn't always loud. Sometimes it's silent, deep, hidden. At home, she took out the complex piece of music they had given her. She stared at the sheet for minutes, eyes scanning each note. Then, without touching the piano, she stood up and walked to a small cupboard in the corner of her room. Inside, wrapped in an old cloth, was something precious, a photograph. It showed a little girl, no older than 8, sitting in front of a grand piano, smiling brightly. Her fingers were stretched across the keys with ease, and in her eyes was a kind of joy that only comes from true passion. That girl was her many years ago. Back then, music wasn't just something she did. It was everything. She she had amazed. Teachers performed on stage and even played in front of large crowds. She didn't learn like others. She just knew. Like music had always been a part of her. But something changed. The joy turned into pressure. Competitions, mistakes, harsh words from adults who expected too much, they took away the beauty and replaced it with fear. One day during a performance, her mind went blank. Her hands froze. The crowd waited, but the music never came. She walked off the stage and never touched the piano the same way again. Now, years later, she was trying to return to that world, quietly, without telling anyone. She didn't want applause. She didn't want attention. She just wanted to feel that joy again, even if only for a few seconds. That night, as the world outside her window went dark, she sat at the piano and began to play. Slowly, softly, she made no mistakes. Her hands still knew where to go. The notes flowed like water. But halfway through the song, her fingers stopped. Her breathing grew heavy. She stood up suddenly, walked away, turned off the lights. The music stayed unfinished. At the next class, she walked in quietly like always. No one looked at her. The teacher handed her another sheet, even harder than the last. "Need to work harder if you want to stay in this class," said with a tired voice. She nodded without speaking and took her seat. She didn't complain. She didn't ask for help. She just placed the new sheet in her bag and waited for class to begin. But one of the younger students in the class, someone who had been watching her for a while, couldn't help but notice something strange. During a short break, he had seen her sit alone at the piano and press a few keys. What he heard didn't sound like beginner playing. It was too smooth, too perfect. He didn't say anything yet, but he started to wonder, who was this woman really? She didn't speak much. She didn't show off. But maybe, just maybe, she wasn't what everyone thought she was. And maybe it was only a matter of time before everyone found out. The following week, the teacher came into class with a serious face. He held a piece of music that looked more complicated than anything they had seen before. He looked around the room, then stopped in front of the quiet woman. "Try this one," he said, placing the sheet in front of her. "You've had enough. Time with the easy ones." Some students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They looked at the sharp notes, the fast runs, and strange symbols on the sheet. It wasn't a beginner's piece. Not even close. It was something even the advanced students struggled with. But she didn't say a word. She gently picked up the sheet and nodded. The teacher walked away, thinking he was helping her improve. Maybe he thought she needed pressure to grow. Maybe he thought she didn't care enough. But what he didn't know was that inside her, a quiet storm had already begun to rise. That evening, she came home later than usual, sat on her bed and stared at the sheet music, holding it with both hands. Her fingers moved slightly over the notes, as if reading them with her skin, not her eyes. She took a deep breath and walked to the old piano. The white cloth had been left off since last week. She sat down slowly, placed the music in front of her, and stared at the keys. For a long time, the room was quiet, no one watching, no pressure. Then she played. At first it was slow and soft, like someone walking carefully across a bridge. But as the notes continued, her hands picked up speed. The sound filled the room, not perfect, but powerful. Her head tilted forward, her eyes closed, and her fingers danced like they used to. Long ago, she wasn't reading the sheet anymore. She didn't need to. It was all inside her. Halfway through the piece, her hands began to shake. Memories came rushing back. A large stage, bright lights, a frozen moment where everything had gone wrong. Her breathing became uneven. She stopped suddenly, her hands falling onto her lap. Her chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. The room felt too small, too loud. It's full of the past. She stood up, walked to the kitchen, and poured a glass of water. She stood by the window, looking out at the night. The moon was full, glowing gently. She closed her eyes and whispered something quietly to herself. Maybe it was a name, maybe it was a promise. Back in the class, the teacher had no idea what kind of progress she was making. He still believed she was struggling, He still believed she was lost. The next day in class, the students were told they would perform short pieces in front of the group in the coming weeks. A practice recital, just to see how everyone was doing. Most of the students looked nervous, but excited, she didn't react at all. After class, while the others chatted, one of the younger students walked up to her. "I saw you playing last time," he said softly. "You're not a beginner, are you?" She looked at him, surprised. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Then she gave a small smile, the kind that hides more than it shows, and replied, "I used to play." That was all she said. Then she packed up her things and left the room. The boy watched her go. He didn't understand everything, but he could feel something, a secret, a story waiting to be told, and soon that story was going to reach everyone in the room. But for now, it remained quiet, just like her. There was an old neighbor who lived in the building next to hers. She had known the quiet woman for years, though they never spoke much. One afternoon, while sweeping her porch, the neighbor saw her return from class holding a music book. She smiled kindly and asked, "You're still playing?" The woman paused for a second, then smiled back and gave a small nod. The neighbor looked thoughtful. "I remember when you were just a little girl. You used to play for hours. I could hear the music from your window. It was beautiful." The woman didn't answer. Her smile faded a little, and she gave a polite nod before walking inside. But her mind was already far away, lost in the sounds of a different time. She closed the door behind her and walked toward the piano again. It had become a part of her daily life now. She couldn't ignore it anymore. Something inside her was waking up. She didn't understand it fully, but she knew it was important. Later that night, she opened an old drawer that hadn't been touched in years. Inside were worn-out photos, folded letters, and a dusty black case. She opened the case slowly. Inside was a medal, gold in color, with her name engraved on it. Junior National Piano Competition, first place? Her fingers brushed over the words. She remembered that day, the lights, the cheers, the flowers. But she also remembered what came after the long practices, the high expectations, and the fear of not being good enough anymore. There had been one performance that changed everything. A big concert. She was just a child, and they had given her a long, difficult piece. Everyone expected her to shine. But when she walked onto the stage and looked at the crowd, something inside her broke. Her fingers went cold. The notes disappeared from her mind. She froze. The silence in that hall still haunted her. People whispered. Teachers looked disappointed. She never returned to the stage again. And now, years later, here she was being handed hard pieces by teachers who thought she was slow. They had no idea who she once was. But maybe that was a good thing. Maybe it was better that way. The next few days, she practiced more seriously. She played in the morning before work. She played late at night. Her fingers moved with grace, but her heart still carried fear. What if she failed again? What if her hands stopped in front of others? At the music class, her behavior remained the same, quiet, calm, and distant. The teachers still believed she wasn't improving much. But one of the students, the same boy who had asked her about her playing before, noticed something again. During a break, he heard her play part of the advanced piece in the corner. It sounded soft, but perfect. When she saw him looking, she quickly stopped and pretended she had just been warming up. But the boy knew what he heard. He searched online that night. He typed in a few words, "Young piano girl, National Award," years ago. He didn't know her full name, just enough to try. And then he found it. An old news article, a photo that matched her face, only younger. The headline read, "Gifted. Piano child leaves stage after sudden breakdown." His eyes widened. It was her. He didn't say anything the next day, but his respect for her grew. While others didn't see her, he did. And soon, the truth would come out, because the day of the classroom recital was getting closer. And this time, well, she wouldn't walk away from the stage. The day of the classroom recital finally arrived. The small hall inside the music center had been decorated simply. Chairs were placed in neat rows, and a grand piano stood at the front of the room. It wasn't a big event, just a few teachers, students, and some family members. But for some, it felt like more than just a small performance. The woman arrived early, as she always did. She wore the same plain clothes and sat quietly in the back. She held her music sheet in her lap, her fingers gently tapping the edges. As if trying to calm the storm inside her, the teacher came in and began calling names. One by one, students went up and played short pieces. Some made mistakes, some played beautifully. The room clapped politely after each performance. When her name was called, there was a short pause in the room. Even though she had attended the class for weeks, most people still didn't know much about her. Some thought she wouldn't even show up when it was her turn. Others expected her to play slowly, maybe stop in the middle like beginners sometimes do. She stood up without a word, walked slowly toward the piano, and placed the sheet on the stand. Then she sat down. Her hands rested on her lap for a moment. The room was silent. Everyone waited. She closed her eyes. Her fingers moved to the keys. And then she played. The first note was soft, delicate like a whisper. Then the next note came, followed by another and another. Her hands flowed across the piano with a kind of grace that didn't belong to someone who just learned to play. It was natural, like the music lived inside her. The room went still. Even the teacher, who had once given her the hard piece as a way to push her, sat up straight, eyes wide. No one expected this. She played the entire piece without looking at the sheet. Her eyes were closed the whole time. Her fingers moved fast, then slow, rising and falling with the rhythm of the song. It was not just playing, it was feeling. It was emotion. Every note carried a memory, a piece of her story. When the last note faded into the air, it was a long silence. Then someone clapped, and another. Then the whole room filled with applause. She didn't smile, just opened her eyes slowly and stood up. She gave a small bow and walked back to her seat, her face calm, almost quiet. But inside, something had shifted. I had done what she had feared for so long. She had faced the piano, not as a child under pressure, but as a woman with her own voice. The boy who had searched about her online looked at her with admiration. He whispered to the girl next to him, "She's not just good, she's incredible." The teacher finally found his voice. It's very unexpected," he said, still surprised. "Where did you learn to play like that?" She looked up, met his eyes, and simply said, "I used to play when I was young." No one asked more. They didn't need to. The music had spoken for her. That night after going home, she didn't cover the piano. She left it open like it belonged to the room again. She sat beside it with a cup of tea and looked out the window with peaceful eyes. She had stepped onto the stage again, and this time she didn't freeze. She didn't run. She played. After the recital, the classroom didn't feel the same anymore. People looked at her differently now. Before, they barely noticed her. Now, some students tried to talk to her. Others smiled at her with respect. Even the teacher who used to hand her the hardest pieces without much thought seemed unsure how to approach her. She didn't change much on the outside. She still came early, sat in the same corner, and kept to herself. But something was different. She no longer looked down when she walked into the room. Her eyes were calmer, her steps steady, like she had finally found the part of herself she had locked away for years. A few days later, the teacher quietly called her aside after class. His tone was softer now. "Would you help the others with their pieces next week?" he asked. "They could learn something from you." She looked at him for a moment, then nodded gently. That small nod was the beginning of something new. The next week, she sat beside some of the students and guided their hands over the keys. She didn't speak much, but her advice was clear. "Listen first," she would say. "Don't rush your hands. Let the notes breathe." Her words weren't technical like the teacher's. They were simple and filled with feeling. The students understood them in a different way. For the first time, they weren't just learning notes. They were learning how to feel the music. One of the students asked her quietly, "Were you always this good?" She smiled a little and replied, "I just loved it a lot when I was younger. Then one day I stopped." "Why?" She paused. because I was afraid I wasn't good enough anymore. And the student looked surprised. But you're amazing.
8.
Shook her head. It's not about being amazing. It's about not being afraid to try again. Those words stayed with the student long after. That evening, something unexpected happened. The video of her performance from the recital had been recorded on a student's phone. Without telling her, it had been shared online. Viral like a celebrity clip, but within a few days, hundreds of people started watching it. Then thousands. Some wrote comments like, "Who is she?" And this woman plays like she's telling a story. A small local music blog picked it up and shared her story, or at least the parts they knew. They called her the silent genius. People in town started asking about her. Some wanted to invite her for small events. Others simply wanted to hear her play again. But she didn't seem excited by any of it. One evening, the boy who had searched about her online showed her the video. She watched it quietly. Her own hands on the screen, the sound of her own playing filling the room. She didn't look proud, just thoughtful. "Do you want me to take it down?" the boy asked. She shook her head. "No, it's okay. Let it stay. Be someone else. We'll remember what they love too." Piano at her home was no longer just a quiet memory. It was used every day now. Sometimes she played with the window open, letting the sound float into the street. The neighbor would sit outside with a cup of tea and smile. She wasn't chasing fame. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She was simply playing. And through that, people were starting to feel something they hadn't felt in a long time: hope, inspiration, and the reminder that it's never too late to return to what once made. Your heart beat faster. One morning, she arrived at the music center and noticed a small paper on the notice board near the entrance. It had her name written on it. It was an invitation. The center was organizing a community music evening for family and friends, and they had listed her as a special performance. She stood still, staring at the paper for a long time. People walked by, but she didn't move. Her heart beat a little faster. The words "special performance" felt heavy. She hadn't agreed to anything yet. Later that day, the head teacher approached her gently. "You don't have to say yes," he said, "but we would be honored if you played." She didn't give an answer right away. At night, she sat at her piano and played quietly. The notes flowed like water. She didn't even need the sheet music anymore. Her hands knew everything by heart. But the question stayed in her mind: was she ready to play in front of people again? She thought about the girl she used to be. It's the one who sat on big stages and played with so much heart. Then she thought about the day she froze. That one moment had taken away years of confidence. But now, things were different. She wasn't a child anymore. She wasn't chasing trophies or praise. She wasn't scared of failing. Now, she was playing because it brought her peace. So the next day, she quietly walked up to the teacher and gave a simple nod. "Yes," she said softly, "I'll play." The evening of the event came quickly. The room was full: students, family, members, neighbors, even strangers who had seen her video online. The lights were warm. The atmosphere was calm and full of hope. She waited backstage, dressed in a plain but clean outfit. She wasn't trying to stand out. She was just being herself. When her name was announced, the clapping began before she even stepped out. She walked slowly to the piano. Her face was calm, but her eyes held a deep glow like a fire that had been sleeping but was now fully awake. She sat down, just took one deep breath, and began to play. The piece she chose was not flashy or loud. It was soft, full of feeling, with gentle highs and lows. Every note touched the hearts of those listening. Some people closed their eyes. Some smiled. A few even had tears in their eyes. She didn't look up. She didn't look at the crowd. She only looked at the keys, and the music told her story without needing a single word. When she finished, the room stayed silent for a moment. Then the applause came loud, full of love. But she didn't need it. She stood up, gave a small bow, and walked off the stage quietly, like she always did. Later that night, someone came up to her and said, "You made me remember why I used to love music." She smiled. "That's why I came back too." In the following weeks, she was asked to give lessons, speak at events, even play at small concerts. She said no to many of them, not because she was afraid, but because she had already found what she was looking for. She still played every day. But now, with her window wide open, people passing by would stop and listen, even if just for a minute. And in those small moments, her music reached hearts quietly, just like she always did. She never called herself a genius. She never spoke of her past. But everyone who heard her knew there was something rare in the way she played. And maybe the greatest part of her story wasn't the talent she had, but the courage it took to return to it.